Good day. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, coming to you from the podcast layer. I am joined by my producer always. He's watching over us, keeping us from doing something silly.
Yeah.
Philville. And I'm also joined by a friend, kind of a professional in some ways. He has the initials to prove it. A professional historian, B.S. Bill Scott. Welcome.
Oh, thank you.
I'm definitely thankful this time of year. There was a time in my life where sometimes this time of year was really hard for me. My foundations in God absolutely kind of changed my perspective. And as I became closer to God, I realized how blessed life is. So I hope that you are engaging in those blessings. Now, being reminded about those blessings, it happens in government chambers all over. So we're going to talk a little bit about In God We Trust in Clovis, where you're going to learn a little bit about American history and what was happening 250 years ago, which sounds like no big deal, but if we don't understand history, we're left behind. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about why we're hopeful with what the Trump administration's doing. So hopefully we're going to fit all that in 45 minutes. Without further ado, welcome, Bill Scott.
Well, thank you. What I wanted to talk about today was we've got the 250th anniversary coming up of the Declaration of Independence. And there are people who are gearing up to start talking about it and make sure we know a little bit more about it. But my question has been, where have you been? Last April was the 250th anniversary of Paul Revere, the Battle of Lexington and Concord. And where was the education department teaching kids about what had happened with that? That was where the term the shot heard around the world came from, and the fact that we beat the pants off the British in the Battle of Concord.
Well, you can't expect an education department to deal with something like history. They're too busy with diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Obviously. But how are our kids going to be proud of our country if they're not proud of what we've done? Last June was the Battle of Bunker Hill that didn't take place on Bunker Hill. And that's where the term, don't shoot till you see the whites of their eyes, came from. And again, even though the British won the battle, they were the victors, we inflicted much more casualties on them than they did on us. And you'll have to read the story about how that came out. But there was a British General Clinton that made the comment that many more such victories as this, and we're not going to have any British soldiers on the continent. So that was again a thing where we did more damage to the British than they did to us. And this was done when there wasn't even an actual army. There was nobody in charge. This were just a bunch of Americans came out of their homes and got involved in this and beat the British.
So hooligans, this is really before the founding of our country.
Yes. They wanted freedom, and they were willing to fight and die for it.
Well, where'd they get these freedom ideas?
Well, that's a long story.
But let's go with the short version of that. The short version is all of these ideas that were enumerated in the first 10 amendments, Bill of Rights.
Yes.
All of them were preached from the pulpit.
Yes.
In other words, almost as if church had something to do with state.
All of these ideas came directly from the Bible. John Locke admitted that. Come on, what's his name? Common Sense. Thomas Paine. Yeah. He mentioned that all these ideas to him were coming from the Bible. So this is where the origins of all these things came from, and these people were definitely very much Christian.
Well, except for most of the founding fathers were deists, right?
Well, yeah. That's the story you get.
That's the story you get,
but you read their words, you read their diaries, you read their biologies.
You look at how they quoted things when they wrote books.
Yes.
Wasn't true. All of them were profoundly influenced by the Bible. There's a little bit of an argument about two, though I don't actually believe they were deist. At least Thomas Jefferson was not by the time he was an older man.
Well, in in Benjamin Franklin's autobiography, he mentions in his 20s he was a deist. By the time he was 40, he wasn't anymore. And by the time he was involved with writing documents for the country, he definitely wasn't. And again, there's a bunch of stories that show what he did that to advance Christianity within the country.
Well, I just wanted to lay that foundation before you continued. I wasn't trying to. We got to get to this, Bill. There's a lot for you to say.
What happened after Bunker Hill, almost within a couple of weeks, Washington was put in charge of the Continental Army. Now, that set up a situation when he got to Boston. It was really a mess. He kind of regretted taking on this job because this was not an army. The people who had the higher officer names, colonel and general, some of them got those positions simply because their uncle was the governor. Others had high-ranking names because they were the person in the community that rounded everybody up and said, let's go, and talked everybody into going. So the officers...
So they didn't have military training necessarily. They often bought their way in or used influence.
Yes.
Much like the aristocracy.
Yes.
And as opposed to a meritocracy, which is what we became.
Now, some of those people did have military, but how did Washington didn't know? He also had to build this army out of people that, well, let's say one group came from one place, and the colonel that was in charge of them gives an order, and his guys would all go out and do something. Well, somebody that came from somewhere else would give the same order, but all his guys would go out and do something different. So there was no consistency. There was no army at all involved in this.
As if they were speaking different languages.
They just made things up as they went. So Washington had to figure out who was worth, keeping the name Colonel General and who wasn't. Well, one of the people he ran into was John Knox. He had no military experience, but he had a bookstore and he liked to read a lot. And and he knew an awful lot about military stuff. And he also had self-trained himself to become an engineer. And what he did with Washington was he toured Breed's Hill defenses, which is the Battle of Bunker Hill, of which he was part of putting together. And Washington was taken by the way he understood what needed to be done and his attitude about getting things done. So even though he didn't have... You guys are going to make this fun, huh? Nobody knows what's going on. So his attitude about getting things done and how he was able to do it, even though he didn't have any military experience, Washington was impressed with him. Well, as time went on in the fall, Washington had started getting things to work right, and he was still trying to decide which of the officers were going to be in what positions and where they were going to go. And he'd do that by hosting dinners and just having various officers show up and talk to him, get to know him. Well, at one of these dinners, Knox did something that's an absolute no-no in every army, anywhere, anytime in the world. And that was...
Up to that point.
Well, people may have done it before, but they would have really been disciplined for it. It's the idea of the chain of command. If you have an idea, you go to your direct commander. You don't go to the commander-in-chief of the whole army with your idea. You move it up the chain of command, and orders come down through the chain of command. The commander-in-chief of the whole army doesn't go to a private and tell him what to do. That goes down through each officer who decides the people below him who's going to take care of what part of that. And it's something in every military is just sacrosanct. The chain of command is very, very important. Well, Knox comes up with this idea that there's Fort Ticonderoga, when the French left it, the British eventually left it, and there's a whole bunch of cannons still sitting up there. And he said, we should go up and get them. Now, I haven't seen any real detailed information on all this, but I've gotten the impression that Washington had talked about this with some of his higher officers, and they decided, being wintertime, it wasn't a good time to go up and get it. So when Knox just blurted this out directly to Washington, everybody was appalled that he did that. But, and again, there's no details on this, but from what happened, I kind of assume Washington decided to both punish and, take on Knox for what he did, because he knows he's capable of doing things that most people can't do. So he gave him the command of going to get the cannons.
So to put this in perspective, a big cannon might be 15 or 20 feet long. It's cast iron. It weighs a few thousand pounds. A small cannon might be smaller than that, but a big cannon back then was something in that range.
Along with mortars that were really, really heavy, but they didn't have a lot of range.
So you literally had to use horses because there was no vehicles, no gas-powered engines, no trains.
Yeah.
You literally had to put them on a sleigh and use either manpower or horsepower to pull them there. This is a big deal in the middle of winter. And the East Coast was pretty brutal at that time in our history. It was much colder than now.
Yeah. So this is, Washington just kind of seemed to have taken the attitude, okay, well, you go get them then. And he gave him 1,000 pounds sterling and letters of introduction from Washington so that along the way he'd be able to get whatever help he needed. And his idea was during the winter, there was a lot of rivers that they just, like you say, he was going to put them on sleds and bring them up the rivers. But that winter wasn't really that cold, and the ice wasn't thick enough to hold them. So they had to just drag them over the hills, right? Well, okay, December comes and goes. And now, one of the things that happened, again, that's coming up, that it's too late for anybody to start talking about this, but January 10th, is when Thomas Paine's Common Sense was printed.
It's inexpensive. It's an easy read. Every American should read it, and I'd encourage even the people that came here illegally. If they read Thomas Paine's Common Sense, they might decide to go back across the border and come the right way.
Yes, it's before that pamphlet got read nationwide. We weren't really just the east end of the continent. But before all the colonies had the chance to read that, most people in America they didn't like what the king had done, but they wanted to remain British citizens. There was an advantage to that. So Thomas Paine's Common Sense kind of flipped that, and it became the reason why we should declare independence. And it's a very, very important document. And like you say, it's short. It's only 30 pages, and everybody and Linda McMahon, the Secretary of Education, where are you? Make sure, it's too late now, but you should be out there seeing that all the kids in all the, at least junior high and high school have the chance to read this. They should all have it and possibly even take tests on what's in it. So that's something that was happening right there 250 years from now, a couple weeks from now. Okay, well, anyway, right after that, and it was January 26th, who shows up? Henry Knox with all 56 cannons and mortars. Now, this changed everything. What it led to the Battle of Dorchester Heights, which wasn't really a battle. And again, it's another story. You've got to go out and read what happened with this and how ingenious this plan was.
Almost as if it was God-inspired, because they had the odds stacked against him in a way that people barely begin to realize. They were taking on the largest naval power in the world. They had the largest and strongest army in the world, meaning England. And they had more training. They had better equipment. They had better weapons. And these little punk upstarts decided to take them on.
Well, and now's the time to put that first picture up. The first picture is what Boston looks like today. But back then, it didn't look anything like this. Go to the next picture. This is today, and then this is what it looked like then. It was almost an island out there in the bay with that little neck of land connecting it to the mainland. After conquered, the British ran into Boston and put a barricade up so that we couldn't get in to get them. Well, we put a barricade up on the other side so they couldn't get out. So for all these months up until now, from June all the way to now we're into January, they'd actually been, it was a siege. Except, as you can see, the British ships had access to Boston from the sea. So it wasn't a real siege, but they couldn't leave the ground. The little neck of land there, Dorchester Neck, right there below Boston, is where they ended up putting all these cannons. But like I say, it's an interesting story. They just appeared, right? And one night they weren't there, and the next morning General Howe gets up, and the place is bristling with all these cannons. And the Navy was real upset that they'd be able to hit their boats. So they decided they're going to leave Boston. We kicked them out of Boston, and they left with their tail between their legs. So,
now, this is one of the most important economic centers at that point in our history.
yes.
So we had New York, we had Boston, we had Philadelphia, and I assume there had to be something.
Charleston.
Yes. I was like, what was it in Virginia? There wasn't a whole lot else that was just jumping. Those were the centers. If you conquered one of those, that was a huge blow.
Yes, yes. So we kicked them out of that, and the Dorchester Heights, it wasn't really even a battle. It's just they realized they couldn't stay, so they left. Now, what's important about that is because of what happened with Henry Knox, Washington, being the commander-in-chief of the army and eventually the president, put in a lot of protocols that set what our army is today. And one of them has evolved into what we now call disciplined initiative. That, again, is something you can look that up. It's not anything hidden, but it's an actual doctrine in our army. And it was used fairly recently. In 1991, we had the war with Iraq to take back Kuwait. Okay? This is where Schwarzkopf used the term shock and awe, because the world first learned what it was like to go up against the modern American military. Those funny diamond-shaped planes, the F-117, that were the first stealth plane. In the middle of the night, they'd go out, and the next morning there was no radar left in Iraq, because the radar couldn't see them, and they were lighting. Any radar station that was lit up, they'd send a radar homing missile to it, and it was gone. They also started taking out all their communication antennas, so that there was very little command and control of the army. And then finally the day in February came when the ground forces were now we're going to move. They had everybody ready to go, and off they went. Well, there was a problem. The last few days there'd been a sandstorm, which meant that all of our expensive fancy satellites that could pinpoint one person, they weren't usable.
Well, and if we knocked out radar, that means our radar was knocked out also?
No, just theirs.
Just theirs.
But I mean, their army had no command control and no way of telling where airplanes were coming from. There was nothing for them to be able to tell what was happening. And then we had the problem with the sandstorm, being able to use our satellites and helicopters to pinpoint their main force. And if anybody that was around then, right, remember that there was the Iraqi Republican Guard, I don't know how to say it, but Talcahuano Division. That was what everybody was afraid of. The news was talking about our untrained boys are going to go up against these guys that have been fighting Iran for 10 years, and they're seasoned, grizzled soldiers, and that's who we're going to put our boys up against. And so there was kind of, this big group that we've got to go through. Well, when you can't see where you're going, you go back to the old ways. What do you do when you're looking for where is the enemy? We knew about where they were, but we didn't know exactly where they were.
You send a scout.
You send the cavalry. Okay, well, the modern version of that was the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment. Okay, they had Abrams tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles, and they were the pointy point of the sword that was out there trying to figure out where exactly are these, Iraqi Republican Guard divisions at. Well, of course, the Iraqis were sending pickets out too to try to tell where we were, and the leader of the very, very tippy tip of the sword was Eagle Troop, 2nd Squadron, 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment, and the commander's name was McMaster. Okay, he was a captain then. He was in charge of the very, very pointy point. And they were taking out the pickets as they found them, so that they weren't getting back to their commanders where we were. Well, it's called the Battle of 73 Easting. And this was an early version of what the GPS system came up with. All of the various Army units, and we had the 7th Armored Division, was in the middle, following a line that was moving to the northeast. On our right was the British, and I think Canadians on our right, and then there were some others down on the flanks on both sides. But we had the biggest swath in the middle. And the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment was out in the lead of this. At a certain point, they turned to the east. Okay, and the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment had orders to go to this point called 70 Easting. I don't really know how that read, but that was what they used for GPS positioning. Okay, well, just as he comes up on this, on a very small little rise, he gets to the top of the rise, and there they are. Hundreds of tanks, and they've all been in what they call defilade, where you get a bulldozer, goes out and digs a hole and then pushes up a big berm up in the front. And then when the tank drives down in it, the only thing you can see is the top of the turret and then the gun. Okay, and he's up on a rise. So from their vantage point, he's silhouetted against the sky. Okay, and usually the procedure is when you do that, all of those tanks, they don't need to aim anymore. They just pick a spot in the hill, and when somebody goes to that spot, you fire at him, right? So he's imagining that they're all set as his guys come over the hill. They should be fired upon with an easy shot because they don't have to aim for it. But he realizes, this all is happening within a second or two. He realized, but they're not. He caught them with their pants down. They were off doing something else. They never got the word how close we were, and they weren't expecting us to get there that quick. So he shows up, and we got him. So he decided, his next words were attack. So his little group comes down the hill. There's nine Abrams and 15 Bradleys come down the hill, just firing as they're going, 1, 2, 3. And before the rest of the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment got over the hill, they were already starting to give up. Because, we just really caught them completely unawares. And at somewhere along the line in his advance, he was told by his lieutenant in the tank, hey, we've passed the point we're supposed to go. And he says, well, just tell them that, I'm sorry, but we're in the middle of combat. We're going to keep going. And basically the war was over.
So we need to tie the past and that story from 91 together.
Yes, that's disciplined initiative.
Okay.
And it's taught today in our war colleges that you're able to do this kind of stuff.
So let's define that, meaning that if you're in the middle of a conflict, you have the right to make what you believe to be the right decision?
If you understand, the way they explain it is that the lower officers understand the mission and what the mission is, what the purpose of what they're doing is. If while they're in the midst of it, come up with on their own initiative something that will work better, they have the right to countermand the orders, because their orders were to stop at 70 Easting, and they just went on. Now, they've got the whole 7th Division behind them, right?
Right, but this started with Washington and Knox, so that people understand that.
Yes.
That he changed our military in a way that allowed you to respond to what's actually happening on the ground. You can plan all you want, and once you're in the middle of it, things might be different. Especially back then.
Yeah.
Now, through drones, through technology, commanders can see stuff in almost real time in most cases.
Yes.
But it made our military something unique and special.
Yes. Now, there are groups that are based on this, like the SEALs or the British SAS. That's their life. They're just given a mission. They're not told how to do it. They just go do this, and they get to figure out how to do it.
Well, I believe that about the SEALs, but I think that Britain, you have to take a diversity pledge and make sure that everything's okay and that you don't attack any oppressed peoples before you actually go on your mission, because Britain has lost its ever-loving mind.
Well,
their mayor just tried to cancel Christmas.
Yeah.
Mayor of London.
The SAS was started in World War II, and they were allowed full autonomy to do whatever they wanted. Just here's the mission. So so anyway, yeah, but when you have big army groups, that's where this is kind of, a borderline thing. That if everybody isn't doing what they're told to do, the idea of the whole army moving can fall apart real quickly. So it's something that's taught, and it's available to any, small command, but it's taught in a way that if you really think you're going to get an advantage, you can use it. Mm-hmm. It was also done on San Juan Hill with Theodore Roosevelt. At that time, military policy was machine guns, which were something that was relatively new, were to be used only for defense. But when he went up San Juan Hill, one of his sergeants took a machine gun with him, and it did make a big difference. And he wasn't disciplined for doing that because it worked.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, now this is what happened 250 years ago. That, like you say, it affects our military today. It's still part of what we do in the military.
Well, we're down to 18 minutes, so
yeah.
we got to kind of tie this together, because I know that the next step of this
is in God we trust. As we move through the year and we start talking about things that happened 250 years ago, I hope that Trump, that Pete Hegseth, and Linda McMahon think about the idea of what else can they teach the kids afterwards. And the big one that's coming up a year from now, Christmas time, I call this the miracle of America's first Christmas. A lot of people.
There must be a Democrat in that we can also hope that would care about something both Christian and positive about this country. So there must be at least one. I can't name one or think of one, but there must be one in leadership.
In a way, I'm upset with Trump, Pete, and Linda for not starting this already. But of course, last April with Concord, they had just taken over, and they were, up to their rectums and alligators trying to drain the swamp.
Yeah.
So, okay, they can have, but this one coming up next Christmas, next year, should be a big deal. On the same night, 1775 years prior, is when Christ was born. The star lit up the night, and the next morning, the shepherds were there. Okay? In 1776, Christmas Day was a very sad day for America. It looked like, just like in Star Wars, the mighty empire was going to crush the rebellion. And that was it. It was going to be over. And that's where we stood on Christmas Day, 1776, except for a miracle that happened that night. And the next, it's the picture of Washington crossing the Delaware. Put that up. This is what most people are in America are familiar with this picture, and they know that's a picture of Washington crossing the Delaware. But you start asking them, well, what happened when he got to the other side? And nobody knows. A few people will tell you the Battle of Trenton. But why is that important? What happened? Well, that's another whole story. But here's the next picture. That first picture was made in 1830. This is what somebody today, kind of from what is known about this.
That's a barge, not a boat. The first one was a boat.
This is more like what it looked like, right? They were out there all covered in frost because it was a blizzard. These guys were crossing this river in a blizzard. And there was nobody smiling and dressed up in their fancy clothes, and it was at night. It wasn't during the day. And this is just a wonderful story of what happened with this, because it's the turning point. Christmas Day, it looked like it was over. Our revolution was going to end. The next morning, we'd reached up and punched the British in the nose. And it didn't end the war, but it changed everything. And it just like on Christmas Day, 1776 years earlier, Christ was born, and it changed everything. And
so against all odds, it was like a miracle happened a second time in the founding of our country.
This isn't as great a miracle as Christ, but the idea of it being a miracle, that this even happened, it shouldn't have happened. And again, this is something that you've got to look into. You've got to read the story. You've got to understand how important this was and why Washington was such a great figure to the country back then, because of this battle.
Okay, I'm going to sidetrack you just a little bit. If you read history about Washington, one of the things he was known for doing was when he didn't know what to do. What'd he go do, Bill?
Go pray.
He would go off and pray.
By himself, and he'd come back and make that after, when they came to shore, they thought this was over because the rest of the group hadn't made it. They were on their own. They had 9 miles to walk in a blizzard to get to where the battle took place. It had taken so long, it's starting to be daylight. They were supposed to be there by daylight. And there was a lot of people that wanted to go back. He went off by himself and prayed, and when he came back, he said, "We're going." And that was it. Everybody took off and like I say, read the story, find out about it. And this is such a great American story. I can't believe that people aren't making movies about it. I mean, there are some documentaries on this.
There were some kids specials that happened when I was a kid.
That kind of explain this, yes.
Yeah.
But try and find anybody that remembers what happened and how important it is.
Or even a little after me with Rush Revere, meaning Rush Limbaugh's whole animated series that talked about history.
That's
American history.
We need more of that. But the schools don't seem to be interested in it.
Yes, but the Hodge twins are doing stuff like this.
Yes.
And Hodge twins they're a movement. They are very much connected with Christianity, our history, moving the country in a conservative direction.
Exactly.
And they're not alone.
Yeah.
Oh,
I know.
I have big problems with Ben Shapiro generally because I think his loyalties are to Israel before they are the U.S., but a lot of what his company's doing is positive.
Yes.
And he's making films and things for both adults and kids that move us in a direction, I believe, that remind us of our history. Okay.
But now
this has got to get us to God,
yes.
In God we trust, because we're down to 12 minutes now.
That's the thing. All of this and these people that are doing this, it's good that they're doing it, but Linda McMahon is in charge of education. She needs to be doing this. She needs to be the one that's out there leading the education department, rather than, like you say, to be concentrating on DEI. They ought to be concentrating on what's good about America.
I think you need to talk to your church. You need to make up a shirt. You cut it kind of like Hulk Hogan. You show up at the Secretary of Education's office, and you let her know what for.
Yes. Yes.
Come on, brother.
Now, what we have been doing, and I know you're familiar with this because you've been with me right along. Back in September, we approached the Clovis City Council about adopting the motto, "In God We Trust," and proudly displaying it in the council.
Wait, separation of church and state.
Well, you're going to get me off on another story. That's Thomas Jefferson's letter. And if you read it in the context it was written about, it means there's a separation. The church cannot be interfered with by the state, not the other way around.
So, because I know that's the first thing they're going to yell. And then
yes.
I'm going to point out I'm lucky enough that I have a $20 bill. And I don't know if we can focus in enough to see this, but right there on it. Oh, it's on this side. It says, "In God We Trust," right there.
Yep.
And every bill you got says that. So they can talk about how we're separated, but the truth is we're intimately connected rather than separated from God.
If you read our Declaration of Independence, the second paragraph makes it very clear that all of our rights come from God, and the government is there solely to protect our rights. So there's God, there's us, and the government's below us. Where up until that time, all of the countries in the world, the government had control of the people. Well, God's in control of us. We trust in God that if we follow his commandments, he'll give us blessings. And the government is there solely to protect our rights.
So here we live in a little, fairly conservative area of California. To my friends that are out of state, yes, there are actually conservative areas of California, and we're fighting to change California. But we don't have "In God We Trust"
In Clovis.
In Clovis.
Fresno does. Fresno County does. And we just thought, well, why don't in Clovis? I mean, it just kind of, let's go talk to them. And so Clovis has given us the chance to, well, they're actually conducting surveys and so on.
Well, they're kind of taking a weak path, but at least it's bringing attention to the issue and gets people to think about it.
Yes, and in January, we haven't got a date. They're going to put this on the agenda and vote about it. And we just want to make it clear that there are people that, like you say, think that the separation of church and state is meant to keep the government or the religion out of the government. No, its purpose is to keep the government out of religion. Mm-hmm. There's nothing anywhere in any document that prevents you from having prayer in school, having the 10 Commandments on. As a matter of fact, when we first started, the 10 Commandments were put on most government buildings.
If you separate government and the church, okay, I understand that for protecting the church, but where do you get your morality without it?
Yes.
Okay, so that's why I wanted it in council chambers, because I want them to look up and go, wait, ultimately there are consequences for my good or bad decisions. I get that's not the only way to get it. It's not how you get into heaven. You have to know God. But nonetheless, you are striving for better. And I think that so often politicians aren't striving for better. And I think that reminder right there, wait, you're ultimately accountable.
Yes.
Is a big deal. I think it sends an important message to the community.
In any civilization you go to, you will find the people, the government, and religion. Now, it may not be the Christian religion, but there will be some kind of a religion, and it's religion that sets morals. If you eliminate that and you have just the people in the government, then where in the world do morals come from? If you make them up yourself, you make them selfishly.
Well, we have a great example of that in China. They've basically banned religion. So now their morals come from the CCP, mm-hmm. meaning the Chinese Communist Party, and they make all the decisions.
Same with Russia.
Same with the Soviet Union. It's a little murkier with Russia because the church has thrived under Putin.
But let's put it this way.
Russian Orthodox Church.
Communism doesn't do well with religion.
Agreed.
Because there are morals in religion. And if they don't come from religion, you can make them up, which means that tomorrow you can change them.
Well, whoever's in charge can change them.
Exactly. Right. But I mean, if you're allowed to make your own morals, right, then you can say, well, this is what's good for me today. And next week, well, this is what's good for me today. And so, who can argue against you if you go by their rules?
You've been circulating a petition.
Yes.
There are online petitions that you can find with the city of Clovis and take the survey. Yes. They're going to want to know where you're from. So I found that on Instagram. I assume because they also have an X and a Facebook page that they're also there. So if you were in support of this, you could either, if you were local, you can put something in the comments and I will respond there and hook you up if you're local.
There
if you
is
want
a QR code.
And I forgot about the QR code.
Yes, yeah. I don't have one. Well, I probably have one somewhere.
I have one in the car, but I don't have one here.
And that'll take you directly to the survey. Right? And like he says, we've been trying to collect petitions. It's not really petitions. It's a show of support. There's no number that we're shooting for.
We're shooting for overwhelming so that it boosts the strength. It's amazing how when there's support for it, politicians are much stronger for an issue.
Yes.
And we have some politicians on the Clovis City Council that I consider to be pretty weak and pitiful on this, and some that are in support, and some that are kind of straddling the fence.
Yes. So, but the idea of our government, whether or not it follows God's laws, and actually Protestant Christians mostly. We've got a little slide that he can put up from the Mayflower Compact. Most people have heard of the Mayflower Compact, but there it is. It's just 3 paragraphs. You can look this up. I just got this.
So that wasn't
the Mayflower Compact on my phone, and you
so
can
this
read
is
it.
long before our founding. This is when Europeans first, I won't say first came. With the modern movement, it's the first time where they successfully established colonies.
They were expecting to go to Virginia.
Yeah.
But
well,
they got
let's
blown
not
off
get into
course.
that because we're running out of time, Bill.
That's where they were going. It was there was government from Britain in Virginia. Where they ended up, there was nothing. So they put together this compact that this is how we're going to
1, 2, 3, 4.
We're going to
6 times in 3 paragraphs.
Yes, that's what I mean.
They were obsessed with
this
God.
is what they were saying. This is how we're going to live. This is how we've all agreed. This is how we're going to live. And in that description, God's mentioned 6 times in this little short thing. So that was very, very strong in the northern parts. In Virginia, it was true, but they had government behind them. These guys are on their own. There's no help coming.
Taking it a step farther forward in the Declaration, God is mentioned more than once.
We've got the Declaration of Independence. This is where it first starts. The laws of nature and nature's God, and then created equal by their creator. Now, what else are they talking about? They're talking about God. And again, the supreme judge of the world, and reliance on the protection of divine providence, right? They're constantly using that protection of divine providence. The Battle of Brooklyn, the Battle of Yorktown, Trenton. There were several of these battles in which they were going to lose, and some natural event happened that never happened. And it came. The British were actually convinced that God was on our side.
Over and over.
So
where does that bring us to today? Because we're less than 2 minutes.
We need to go back to in God we trust. That's who we trust to give us our freedoms.
Well, de Tocqueville talked about how America was how did he? I can't get the right quote, but basically we were a great country because we were a good country. We were a good country because we believed in God. As if God's blessings came in direct proportion to how much we followed his will.
Because we set up our country with God at the top, not a king, right? He called us exceptional. And this is where the term American exceptionalism comes from. But we were the exception in all the world that put together a government like this. And yes, that's what made it back in 1830. I mean, we'd only been around 50 years, right? And all of a sudden, we were outperforming what was happening in Europe.
No, in the whole rest of the world.
But he came from Europe. In the world he knew, we were outperforming them in almost every way.
Well, and now we have a king again in President Trump. A king that won't take a salary. A king that seems to be dedicated to having our nation have sovereignty. So kicking out illegals, dealing with fraud,
dropping the size of the government.
I
heard a statistic the other day.
He's an impressive king. I've never seen a king that gave that much power to the people.
Do I have time real quick?
You have a very quick point. 30 seconds, Bill.
There was a statistic about the amount of jobs were 140,000 last month, but the government got rid of 168,000.
In other words, we got rid of worthless jobs or marginally useful jobs.
Yes.
And we still grew.
Yes.
Folks, there is hope. God is good. And he gave us a blueprint. That divine providence that created something special here in the United States. We need to recapture that. We need to understand how blessed we are. Of course, along the way, our country made some mistakes. But the great thing is, in this country, everyone, through hard work and effort, has the ability to rise and have a really great life. And that is truly one of God's blessings. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Now, I've never asked why the Phillips 66 here. You're clear. Oh. I thought the TV went off. It's over.
Okay.